French President Emmanuel Macron has called for an end to the fighting in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo and the looting of the country's natural resources. He made the remarks at a press conference in Kinshasa as he concluded his four-nation tour of the African continent. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa tells us more.
DRC President Félix Tshisekedi and his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron discussed bilateral relations at the Palais de la Nation in Kinshasa. But it was the armed conflict in the east of the DRC that took center stage. Fighting between the Congolese army and the M23 rebels has forced thousands of people to flee their homes since last year. President Macron called for an end to the conflict.
Alors je souhaite aujourd'hui que la France reste fidèle.
I wish to assure you that France remains faithful to its role as an unwavering ally of the Democratic Republic of Congo to defend its integrity and sovereignty. The DRC should not be the spoils of war. The open-air looting of the DRC's resources must end. No looting, no balkanization, and no war.
The DRC has repeatedly accused Rwanda of backing the M23 rebels, but Rwanda has denied the accusation and in turn accused the DRC of supporting the FDLR militia that was involved in the 1994 Rwandan genocide. Last year, UN experts said they found substantial evidence of Rwanda's support for the M23 rebels. That has strained relations between the neighboring countries.
There was no reason for this aggression. It's an economic war instigated by Rwanda. Now we want to see whether Rwanda can do without the looting of our resources that they have been doing for close to 20 years. If not, then we will expect sanctions against Rwanda from France in clear terms.
Some Congolese accuse France of siding with Rwanda in the fight against the M23 rebels. Protesters recently took to the streets of Kinshasa to denounce the visit of President Macron. An initiative aimed at restoring peace in the east of the DRC is being led by leaders from the East African community. Last month, they ordered a ceasefire and the withdrawal of the rebels from all occupied areas by March 30th. The French president is hoping that the rebels will heed the call this time round. The DRC was the last stop of his four-nation tour of the African continent. President Macron's visit to the DRC and other African countries comes amid the growing influence of China and Russia on the continent. He pledged to strengthen ties with the DRC in security and the health sector, which he said would be for the mutual benefit of both the DRC and France. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Well, Macron's Africa tour comes at a time when there's been growing anti-French sentiments in some Western African countries and in the DRC. Earlier, we spoke to Ovigwe Eguegu, a policy analyst at Development Reimagined. We began by asking him about the impact of the visit.
When looking at French-Africa relations, the core structural issues were not really addressed. For instance, one of the main grievances of French-Africa relations in West Africa, or at least in Africa in general, is the issue of the CFA, and that is the French control over the monetary and financial policies of this country. So there has been no mention of that whatsoever. And also with regards to the security issue, it's not just a question of reduction of French troops, but also even in countries where France will be present, what will be the modalities of that cooperation? That wasn't really spelled out clearly. So even though President Macron is speaking to some of the issues, he's not doing it in a very meaningful way, and is not really addressing it in ways that has to do with the structural dynamics of the relationship. Yeah, I think the DRC issue and the conflict in DRC is very complicated, and it is very important to also note that African leaders are not waiting on Europe or France in particular to address this problem. You would recall that there have been peace talks in Nairobi, in Kenya, in Angola, and agreements have been reached on how M23 troops will withdraw and will get to a ceasefire. So the African leaders themselves have being front and center and taking the lead on this issue. The way France the way France is going to interact is it has to be based on the arrangements on the ground led by the African leaders. And I think even the DRC president asking for France to join in, or at least to lead the effort in sanctioning Rwanda, to a large extent, that might not necessarily be very helpful. We've seen French troops being kicked out of Burkina Faso, from Mali, and also even in Central African Republic as well. I think France would have to really re-strategize, or at least all of its efforts to restart or reset the relationship needs to also focus more closely, on the West African region.